Have Prashant share some of his experience in Deer Park and also his a little bit of experience trying to navigate different worlds and trying to find a language to bridge these different worlds. So Prashant has been an activist and very deeply an own spiritual journey and helping so many others with their spiritual journey. So as we all know, there's a lot of debates all over, a lot of this false dichotomy in some sense, activism versus spiritual kind of thing. And how do you create for many of us it probably is a silly debate because it seems so obvious how these are connected. But Prashant has really tried to bring some way to bridge these different worlds and conversations. And this larger question of, this is Center for Study of Indian wisdom, classical wisdom traditions. Wisdom classical
Indian.
Classical Indian wisdom. Anyways, you can play with this. Classical Indian wisdom traditions. So these four words are very powerful and at the same time might create controversy also in the world, how they're interpreted and what. So one of the conversations that's been very much alive in the, I think, IMA in many places is what does it mean to engage with this rich heritage, these philosophical, spiritual traditions here? What does it mean to engage with tradition? Is that and this modern and traditional, again, dichotomy that's been created? And how to do it in ways which are regenerative and not falling into some fundamentalist kind of traps or something. So maybe Prashant can share a little bit, and others can also chime in on their experiments. This idea also of somebody, I think Manish was also reviewing this one, this sense of reverence or sense of sacred. How do we reconnect to that actually and rebuild a worldview which also has a sense of sacred embodied in all aspects of our living?
So background, broadly, I'm not from this area. I moved up here 2004, 16 years ago. Was not so-called born in a Buddhist family or grew up in Bombay and started exploring, questioning concerns outside in the world, reflecting also in sort of creating upheavals inside. Got fortunate to spend some time in Thailand and Myanmar, 2000, working with this Thai social activist. Got more exposed to Buddhist tradition in Theravada countries, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos. Came back, again started connecting with groups here working in environmental issues, social justice issues. I think connected with Manish and Shilpa in 2001, Walkouts Network. And 2003, I walked out of a master's degree. And anyway, I moved up here. I was already studying Buddhism with various Tibetan teachers, and they asked me to start this institute. I think maybe you all got a sense, this was a monastery earlier, till 2001. They had 300 monks living here. And they would study 15 years classical Indian Buddhist philosophy. The monastery moved to this other village where we'll go this evening because of the number of monks kept on increasing because of Chinese occupation and what China was doing in Tibet, especially in the late 90s. There was a lot of crackdown and thousands of people were fleeing across. So the monastery we'll go today has around 800 monks. And basically 15 years what they study is works of Indian Buddhist masters from Nalanda, Vikramshila, Takshila, and in fact what Claude mentioned yesterday, I did my bachelor's honors in philosophy, and I think we don't even get 1% of what they study in these traditional gurukuls. So just kind of so disconnected from our own heritage. But Deer Park broadly, I think, we say Indian wisdom traditions, but specifically our anchor or as a reference is Nalanda, or the Nalanda Parampara. And that, as you all know, historical Nalanda, Vikramshila, Takshila, Odantapuri, all of these universities or gurukuls flourished between 3rd, 4th century AD till around 12th century AD. And I think Nalanda was probably the biggest in size and numbers, and there's a lot of accounts. Nalanda, I think, was, broadly very clear, anchored in Buddhist thought as darshan. But within Buddhist darshan, there's a lot of various schools. So it is not like only one view. There are various positions about idea of self and universe and consciousness. But Nalanda also interestingly had this whole sophisticated understanding and approach in its curriculum for right from the land to medicinal herbs to alchemy to water to astronomy. So one could see, this is very clearly documented in historical accounts, the approach. And I always remember this one story I read about from a Chinese pilgrim who went to Nalanda that talks about they had eight or nine ponds, bathing ponds, and each pond had a different set of herbs. And monks and students, as per their body disposition, would bathe in each pond. So one can see how sophisticated their understanding of the body was and the ecosystem. That, probably the highest form of Ayurveda and, So for us, that was the reference, that how do we recreate that spirit in the sense of appreciating these traditions, the richness, but also, and making it accessible. So we also realize that, because if monks or, in any traditional Gurukulam of the Indian philosophical traditions, whether it's Jaina, Advaita, Buddhist, 15-20 saal, 15-20 years to is minimum study. So, trying to run courses for 3 days, 5 days, we don't want to make it completely flaky and distorted. But then we also felt there is a role just to give a reference of what is authentic. And for us, in all our curriculum and programming, we realized that the tradition, Indian tradition, there is an oral tradition and this Guru Shishya Parampara, but tradition is also anchored around sutras and shastras. And that is very important because that gives us ability, especially with philosophical traditions like Buddhist and all, that there is the scope for interpretation and richness as per understanding, as per your own experience. So we said that is very important, that to make it authentic, we must anchor our programs around textual tradition of the Pali canon, Sanskrit canon, whether it's Buddhist, whether it's Advaita, whether it's the other darshanas. So we try to have programs from this. All our faculty comes from traditional training. So they are not academic professors or scholars. A lot of monks from whether it's Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, Japan. Because of Nalanda being a reference, we also said that to understand Nalanda, we have to look outside our present day borders of nation state. So there is more of that part of Indian tradition preserved and practiced in Myanmar or Nepal or Sri Lanka or Indonesia or, than what we think is now. So our sense of identity, sense of recovery. So, for me personally now I feel, I would feel when I say I'm an Indian, I would draw from a civilizational sense of identity of what it means to be an Indian. And I think, so that's been some of our work. So when we look at programs here, when we do calligraphy workshops, we have Tai Chi or we have Zen, we see it as recovering our civilizational knowledge systems, which originated here, flourished here, and then they disseminated. And I always, for me personally, I feel, and a lot of my own Buddhist teachers feel that India is like a mother. This land is like a mother. And the role is far bigger than we can conceive in our sense of nation state based identity. So that's something we try to do here, create this atmosphere of openness, accessibility. Let people come, and even you want to sit one day in a program, fine. We don't want to deny that, but we just want to make sure you respect and this is something authentic. And we are just getting 1% of the entire dhara, which is still being practiced and preserved in some pockets. The challenges are, I think what earlier you had shared in working in this kind of domain is very, because one, for example, even this word is used, I think you just used it now. So this spiritual, secular, and these dichotomies like religious. So you put Buddhism in a religion, or you put it in a philosophy, you're spiritual, there is no activism. So I think when we started Deer Park, and I mean, I didn't see any contradiction in filling up that room with garbage till the roof. I think you all saw that, the zero waste room, or doing the farming, or working on EPR issues, Tibet issues, whichever issues, and doing my Buddhist practice. To me, it's all one taste, one experience. It is, practice of whether it's, I think, at a very outer level, outer action is a sense of a yardstick of my own practice. And like, often in Buddhist teachings, we study, okay, till you don't have an enemy, you will never know how good is your practice of patience, compassion, And the Dalai Lama often also talks about the Chinese, and so I mean, that way I don't see any dichotomy. But yes, when people come here, and we do see that people who come, and I mean, sometimes we get say 5,000-6,000 students a year, and then there are many people who don't relate with what we do with the land or what we do with the local communities, and also they don't relate with that. As Buddhists say, I take a vow, I will not kill, but then we are indirectly killing. I mean, whether it's our governments, whether it's the corporate, industrial, world, it is all killing on our behalf. So we are in some way collectively, karmically linked. So that way, yes, the practice does make you sort of see sense of interdependence far more. I mean, it does sort of, I think, it really helps me to understand social change, social sort of impact more deeply. And I also see that there are still beings here in this area. Like, in fact, there's even a Hindu, I think, Swami of Ramakrishna Mission. Maybe some of you went last time up. He's been in retreat for last 40 years. Swami Vishuddhanand in Upper Bir, and there are Tibetan yogis who do whole life retreat nearby. And I think sitting in a cave locked in, they are also making immense contribution of, and so, I stop sort of judging that just because they are not out there and doing action in our sense of language, they're not making any contribution. They're not saving the world. In fact, I think in one of our sessions earlier, Claude and we were talking with one of our young friends that probably if more people are lazy in the world, we'll really save the planet, no? Climate change. But like now 14 years been here, and I think we've tried to do something with Deer Park. We've tried to make it authentic, trying to honor the tradition. And also we've been trying to do small experiments, looking at Indian knowledge systems, traditional knowledge systems. We've done some work together, also with Manish Bhai, Claude and some other friends. And I think some of the references we have received as guideposts of tradition, not only from Buddhism, but even people like A.K. Saran and some of the writings, is that, I mean, I think there is no limit. Na? Tradition is a continuity of that sort of mind sort of enriched in goodness. So I think even a belly dancer can embody and express tradition. There is no limit. So I think our references, yes, historical references sometimes are very narrow, but even in Buddhism we see like Buddhist history only talks about monks and nuns, and probably more of monks and then less of nuns, and nobody talks about merchants and courtesans and great emperors and kings who've contributed immensely. I mean, even at the time of the Buddha, there were so-called prostitutes who were great patrons of the Buddha, and so I mean, history does disservice to tradition, and who writes history and who tells history. But anyway, any questions? Then we can sort of.
So why did you call this a Deer?
So this was actually the name was chosen by our Buddhist teacher Khyentse Rinpoche, who felt sort of honoring the spirit when the Buddha, after enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, went to Sarnath, Mrigdava, or the Deer Park, and shared his experience. Because he said the first teaching, it was not a teaching, it was sharing of an experience, and there was no Buddhism. So honoring that first spirit of sharing an authentic experience. And people who were there, or who later became his disciples, were not disciples. They were just there to share and verify experience. And that was the atmosphere in that time of ancient India, or whatever we call it, So that sort of experiential learning and then sharing each other's inner and outer, sort of, that is the idea here.
Indian wisdom traditions also include the indigenous folk wisdom, which is not classical or documented, but still very important. This thing. So, I mean, it gets excluded from.
No. We've tried a little bit work. We tried to do some work in the past with the Ganesh Devi Center, but then recently in the last 5 years we did some work documentation of some of the tribes behind Beeling, some of the Gadi recording the local songs, and so we had a small project on local wisdom, because interestingly many of the villages or the people settle above Deer Park, below the forest line. They all have descended from villages or up on the valleys beyond. We're all Gadis. So after descending down, kids have started going to school. So they've sort of lost their access to their own traditional knowledge system of herbs, about the sheep. So we've tried to do small work around it, but it's been quite tough for us. One basically just the...
But maybe even just an acknowledgement, this is very vast and diffused all over India, but even an acknowledgement that it is an important contribution to future, lighthouses.
Yes. In fact, we are talking, I think Siddharth is here, we've been talking about doing some project around folklore and animation and storytelling, and but it's definitely there as an intention.
Prashant, I'm curious because Deer Park is still very young as an organization.
Yes.
What is the vision for the next 15, 20 years? Like what is it that you and I guess Rinpoche as well hope to see flourish in Deer Park as it expands and grows and matures?
One, definitely we have we won't shy about it, that for us to promote the appreciation that this being called Buddha, who came from this land, and appreciation or exposure about his legacy of what he's left, his teachings, and then the legacy of all these great yogis and panditas, which most of us in India have no clue about, like whether it's Nagarjuna, Shantideva, Naropa, Tilopa, all from these great Buddhist universities whose works are now only preserved in Tibet. So increase appreciation of that, and that itself is a big sort of mission for us. The monastery like we go to today, this evening, there are 800 monks who studied 15 years only works of Indian masters, who we all, even at the master's level in Indian philosophy, any university, they don't have any clue of. Maybe they'll know Nagarjuna, but there's no parampara of, because it's all in the Tibetan canon, and maybe 1% something Max Muller and some academic did in the West. And so just increase that appreciation.
How the new Nalanda University shaping up in terms of these visions?
We've been never involved in that loop, and also, but I think it got into a lot of trouble. It was anyway a bit, Amartya Sen came in and he started it with the wrong foot, and then they had, Aspi will have more.
Actually 3 Nalandas. The archaeological Nalanda, the ruins, which you can go and see, which is the real Nalanda. Then there is the Nalanda University or Nalanda International, where Amartya Sen was involved. Now that is just ripping off the name of Nalanda. It was supposed to be a modern university where you do exactly what you were criticizing.
Yeah, like
but
IIT.
But you take the inspiration from Harvard and Yale and whatnot. That's that. Then, after independence, there was a Nava Nalanda.
Yeah, which is there,
Which is still there, which actually under Nehru's sort of blessings was an autonomous institute. It's a university or a deemed university, I'm not clear of the legal thing. But somewhere down the line, in Nehru's later years or after Nehru, it was taken over by the government of India under the Ministry of Culture. Now there they are doing some research on scripture, trying to preserve something, trying to do some translation from Pali, It's mainly the Pali tradition. And our friend,
Pant. Pant is gone.
Pant is gone, but so he was really very sincere.
Person from Igatpuri was there,
So
from
he
the
was
Vipassana Institute. I think he was there for 8 years, director.
After the BJP came,
Then they
when Mahesh Sharma became Ministry of Culture, I don't need to say more.
What's the government's relationship with this space in the sense that is there support, is there
no. So we are a I mean, like a society registered non-profit. Government Ministry of Culture has some scheme to support Buddhist/Tibetan institutions, but 90% of the money doesn't go to Buddhists. It's all recycled to their own whatever.
100% Indian.
Huh. But this land, for example, this region or Bir village, the Tibetans came here in the early 60s, and some of you may have been to these Tibetan settlements in South India, like Mysore, Keva, Karnataka. So that all was land given by Government of India, but this was bought by Tibetans themselves. So technically it's a settlement, but it's not like, defined by government. But interestingly, even for here, there's an exiled Tibetan government in Dharamsala. They have their parliament, they have their ministries. So even here, we are part of the local Indian panchayat. Bir is a village, but there are 3 Tibetan panchayats who have an assembly, and they have their pradhan who gets, I think, posted from Dharamsala, and they have a budget, and so it's a proper functioning structure they have. So yeah, they have their health center. So it's all funded from their exile government.
But are the schools run here run in any Tibetan way? Or
Hanji, yeah. So that I think is Nehru had done this thing where they created the central school for Tibetans in the 60s, I think. No, with Kapilaji, and I think so. There's a big TCV here, Suja, near the landing site below June 16. That's got. I know everyone will know that as a. So that school has 2,500 kids. It's a boarding school, and 90% are orphans. They've come from Tibet and they can't go back illegally. So their curriculum is CBSE, but it's all in Tibetan language. So they have that extra provision, and I think people like Samdong Rinpoche and all really try to even make it more traditional and alternative, and so they set up a school in Dharamsala, which I think Manish, Claude and all, we were part of that experimental school, which was again no exams in the Tibetan system. So that is still running. There's an experimental school in Dharamsala.
There are 2 TCBs.
There's Chontra, and there's Suja, and I think they're
upper TCB.
There are around 10 in India.
Yeah. But the question I have is that what do young Tibetans here usually end up doing?
So it is most of the, now what, they must be around, I think 800 families in Bir. Most, wait, because there is I think most of them don't own any land here. So there's no relationship with the land. Like South India, they're still doing farming and all. Here mostly would do trade, winter trade, selling sweaters. They would buy from Ludhiana and then travel to rest of India. And then slowly try to migrate through these refugee resettlement programs. Because there is a bit of that, you're in a bus stop, you don't know where you're, that loss of identity, you're stuck, like in a midway position.
They are facing the same onslaught from Western culture.
It's not...
Smartphones and jeans and,
So like now, the monasteries, interestingly now, because also after the Olympics, the borders are quite tight, so they can't flee across illegally. So now most of the monasteries, the monks we will see are Himalayan region, not Tibetan. So all the hill tribes in Nepal, Bhutan, Arunachal, Ladakh, Zanskar, Kinnaur, Spiti, they all would be coming here to study. But again, there too, numbers are declining because of modern education and these aspirations. So traditionally, it would be customary send every one boy to the monastery and to sort of, it would be an honor. But that is all changing. So there is a lot of challenge in the traditional pedagogy and that 20 years study and then you don't even get a certificate valid to get a job. So these kind of values are coming in now. it's
So Prashant, my question is, since it is an Indian classical wisdom
yes.
promotion center, so there is a very profound work done by 4 Acharya, Gaudapadacharya, Ramanujacharya, Adi Shankaracharya,
Yes.
and Vallabhacharya. So is there any study?
We've done few courses around that, but one of the challenges I must confess is to, our sort of, one, it's been hard to find faculty who can regularly come, and also, our criteria for faculty, we are not here to promote the individual. For us, it's important to promote the Granth more than the individual, because for us, we believe individuals are born from the tradition. So, but now the general perception is the individual, even in tradition, is more important than the human. Whether we see it with music, we see it with all these Indian classical, it's always the individual who highlights more than the. So it's been a bit of a challenge to find good faculty who also want to commit. So for example, we don't play in any of the, all our courses are free. It's all on Dana. So, sometimes, certain faculty have more expectations. This is across, I'm not just saying about Advait, whether it's Buddhist. So it's not easy. That too, we can see, like, even the challenges in tradition. Like, for example, we try to do a course every year on Yoga Sutra. To have a yoga teacher come and just honor and teach the Yoga Sutra, to find that teacher is also not easy. Because in McLeodganj there are 200 yoga classes happening one time, but nobody is teaching Yoga Sutra. So, we can see and same with, we can see the distortion in Buddhist tradition, mindfulness, all the secular and all this, now this gone into MBSR and Cambridge, or I don't know which, Harvard, and they all doing their own patenting, and so, and it's all coming back to India, and they are, charging money to teach all these. So,
and for that matter, even like for the Vedic culture and Sankhya and all.
Yes, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, yes.
Yeah, Nyaya, Vaisheshika,
yes.
or Shankara Bhashya.
So this is such profound knowledge and so much wisdom. It can guide you from a human being to Brahmasmi type, But we are unable to find in India, even from, that's why I asked this specific question. See, in Western world, Indian philosophy is famous with Shankar philosophy, There's such a profound effect of Adi Shankaracharya. And they are teaching this Shuddha Advait, Kevala Advait philosophy in Harvard and all those places. But I don't know what version they are teaching and who teaching that type of, and some of the work of people who have gone through, I've studied, and it is very deteriorating. And that is my pain, that I am not able to find some in entire India, any course of such kind which can.
We know that.
In the Advait section, we do a regular program for last 12 years on Kashmir Shaivism, some of the texts, Swami Lakshman Ju and that whole parampara. So that's been going on, but we've seen our strength is more with the Buddhist tradition and also the context, and so.
I understand that.
But definitely, in the Buddhist tradition, for Tark and for sort of Pragya to grow, you need the favorable opponent. So, but that opponent is seen naturally at a very mature level. So for us, that exposure to these other darshan is very important. And now to have those, I think, very difficult. We had little bit contact with Vai, Pragya Pathshala, and earlier, the work in Maharashtra. I think they were doing some work in Nyaya. But it's very difficult now to access good sort of traditional scholars and
Hindu tradition, philosophy, Vedic tradition, I would say, believe in the indwelling God concept.
Atman.
Yeah, the God is not limited to sky or heaven or temple. He is inside me.
Yes.
How closely, because Buddhism, as per our tradition, we consider him as a manifestation of
Vishnu.
It's an avatar, incarnation for us.
Right.
And equally respectful as Ramakrishna and So how close Buddha teaching is in support of that concept of indwelling God,
Broadly, Buddhist, we don't, philosophically, darshan wise, we don't believe in Atman. And broadly, they loosely say, Purnata and Shunyata. So for us, there is this sense of self is relative, it's temporal, it's built up of causes and conditions, but it's not ultimate. My understanding is practically the Buddha was sort of challenging self-grasping. And also self-grasping because it does at some level create a lot of suffering. Because the moment we tend to grasp at ourselves and my name and my, we tend to, I think that to me, but naturally it's philosophically it's a big debate on Advaita and Madhyamika and Shunyata and Purnata and Anatmavad and Atmavad, but that's a very high level darshan. I think, we have to be trained in darshan and then training in debate, Tark Shastra to sort of, otherwise our sense of debate and our references are very, it just does, it goes into a very,
So the similarity would be that your Advaita and Madhyamika both are non-dual understanding of reality. They are both non-dual. And as you said, in Advaita, ultimate high level of Advaita, you don't believe God is somewhere else. Kan kan mein Bhagwan hai sort of thing. Every particle. So the non-duality in Advaita would be the non-duality between Paramatma and Atma. Because Paramatma is not somewhere else, not somewhere to go to meet him. We are, each and every particle of you is Paramatma, but there is an Atma. Whereas in Madhyamika, the non-duality is between the phenomena and the rest of the world, whether the phenomena is self or outside phenomena. So, and therefore, it denies a creator God. There are many gods with a small g, but it denies a creator God because it doesn't depend on a creator God for the explanation of how things and phenomena arise, how they sustain and how they disappear.
It's all interdependent.
So the alternate to a creator God who creates and then sustains the whole world is the concept and philosophy of dependent origination.
Pratitya Samudapada is what.
And when you have dependent origination, then every phenomena is empty of inherent existence. So in Buddhism, when we say empty or shunyata, it's a shorthand. It's an abbreviation. Instead of every time using the phrase emptiness of inherent phenomena, I simply say emptiness. All phenomena are marked by emptiness. But here emptiness doesn't mean nothing. It doesn't mean just a void. It is a shorthand for emptiness of inherent existence of that phenomena existing from its own side. So instead of this long-winded sentence, I say emptiness.
So what's the invitation to the IMA in terms of engaging with, classical wisdom traditions, indigenous wisdom traditions? Like, what's that as a core inquiry? How do you see that, and what kind of invitation would you put? And you have other people who have been trying to do it. Maybe they can just briefly share something how they've also been in their own projects trying to.
I think the strength of Deer Park has been the last 12, 13 years is to be a sort of bridge to this rich Buddhist tradition. And for me as a student of philosophy, I see that the Buddhist tradition, because it was sort of preserved and practiced in Tibet in a sort of isolation, they have been able to preserve extensive amount of methods, which methods of transformation of the mind, of the emotions. So that I think we as a small center here try to create that link to have access to these for people to come and experience them. So that's been somewhere we've been trying to be a strength. But naturally, when we look at Buddhism, as I said, we look at it in the context of Nalanda tradition, and we look at then other Indian knowledge systems, classical, and we see, when we look at Indian tradition, then we see that same dhara flowing through when we look at works of Sri Aurobindo, Tagore, Gandhiji, Vinoba Bhave, Dharampalji. We don't see a limit there, and it will continue. So that's how we see Deer Park. And for us, I think, for me personally and for Deer Park, being part of this or being part of learning societies is challenging these mainstream assumptions of shiksha, knowledge, and knowledge which is driven now all for worldly gains, and knowledge which was, for a higher consciousness which we all have. So that for us is very important to play that role, to remind us that what are references of knowledge and wisdom. and and now how they're being co-opted and diluted and by this, and this is all the present day economic system is, as per Buddhism, is only an expression of greed and ignorance. So that is something we have to challenge. It's institutionalized, whether it's democracy, whether it's governments, we need to challenge that. And that's for us, our bodhisattva sort of path.
Yeah. I feel that this whole concept of Hinduism has been hijacked by this ruling party. Yeah. And then therefore we need to also articulate what Hinduism means to us as a community. So that is the struggle to find authentic
references.
Hinduism. Yeah. So.
And also when we talk about in history, like we're talking about, say, Hinduism 8th century and then what changes. So with Buddhism we have clear, because the Tibetans have taken a whole chunk from India in 8th, 9th, 10th when they started that knowledge transfer. So it is still more systematically preserved. But yes, Hinduism is far more difficult to sort of tread on that. Even for me personally, it's it's tough. It's very tough.
How do we articulate and challenge this?
If you look at Pavan Varma's book on Adi Shankaracharya, which I was reading before I came here, and the way he criticizes the Hindutva agenda completely, and he elevates the whole, the higher level understanding of Hinduism. So I think the challenge has to come from within. It cannot come from Buddhists, or it cannot come from Christians.
No, but Aspi, for example, we've had a little bit connection with these very interesting Nepali, Nevari, some of these Nevari gurus, because, as you know, Hinduism flourished in Nepal and to some degree was less affected by what happened in the subcontinent as physical. But, like say example, Ratnashri, he talks about pre-Shankara Hinduism, which to him is it changed extensively after Shankara. And the whole
Vedic scriptures, and then what you get in the Puranas. So, I mean, Buddha being an incarnation of Vishnu comes from the Vishnu Purana. It is not Vedic at all.
It's not Vedic,
The Vedic gods are forgotten, not today. Where is Indra?
I want to understand, I see this as a person that you are part of a lot of organization or a collective activity that is going on, a collective vision or a collective thing. So how do you really take that collective to a certain single vision rather than driven by individualistic? So individual and collective, these both things are happening simultaneously, like individual contribute and the collective comes in. So is there any practical way in Buddhism where the individual thinks more for collective rather than the self? We are doing this in many ways, whether it is organized, unorganized, alternative, holistic, you give any name, but there are certain collective coming in and doing something, and there are individuals who are there. So how does this collective stands more than the individual so that it sustains, which I see a very challenging thing everywhere. So is there a practical way? Is there a practical way in the
so basically the thing to examine
very practical way,
yes, very practical. The way to understand it is to probably study how the Buddha organized his Sangha and how he resolved disputes within the Sangha. And they say that the Sangha of the Buddha was the first real democratic functioning of a group based on consensus and so on.
For me, I don't know about Buddha. For me, even Buddha, even people started following Buddha. Now, if you have to unfollow Buddha and have your own ways of what he's saying, the principles, you're born and you are born with a certain boon and the curse also follows, is what I understand. So, I don't know how things happen. But so even if you have to, what principles Buddha says and you apply that and, forget Buddha and start doing what he's talking about, the vision. You're taking vision ahead rather than the individual. How does that happen practically is something which is a burning question inside me.
It doesn't happen practically if you have Buddhist leaders and teachers who want to promote themselves or want to promote the religion. It only happens if Buddhist teachers and leaders actually follow what the Buddha said. I am not the person. And when he was dying, and the monks, his students asked him, what message do you have for what should be preserved?
For example, in the monastery today, if they have 800 monks, they are choosing to study there 18 years, there's no certificate, nobody is forcing them. I think what is holding them is the dharma, the parampara, what they're studying, as nobody's, there is no like somebody giving them, there's no power center there. It is a very voluntary this thing. So definitely the dharma or the parampara of the granths, the sutras, the shastras, that has an immense ability to ground, to transform, your chit parivartan, the ability to sort of, definitely that for us in the Buddhist tradition is important.
When Buddha was asked, which of your teachings would you emphasize, or who will be the leader now that you are going away, you are passing away? He said, be a lamp unto yourself.
Yeah.
And lamp unto yourself. So he was very strongly saying, don't believe in any teacher, not even my authority. Examine everything that I have taught you as a goldsmith would examine gold. You rub it, you burn it, you weigh it, and then accept what you feel from your experience is correct and reject the others. So Buddha never propagated Buddhism.
Yeah, there is a kind of preservation work, but this actually bringing it into this life and what does it mean in our life choices or systems we have? How is that conversation? Because in the Jain tradition, we're struggling to even have. People like to talk what happened 2,500 years ago and bring those things. But what does it mean today?
So 90% of our programming, whether it's Buddhist or Dvaita, will be around programs which have a direct impact to your daily life. And I think the fact the teachers we get, they are very challenging these concerns and these notions of, whether it's progress, whether it's shiksha and sabya and all these, which we are dealing with, materialism, and naturally there is a very strong, especially in the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, the concern for the planet and what's happening,
There is now this whole movement of engaged Buddhism around the world.
Yeah.
Prashant mentioned his teacher. Sulak Shivaraksha, when he said he was in Thailand.
The Tibetan tradition or the Mahayana parampara, which also went from India, is very socially engaged. So the model is not about retreating only, but it's also engaging in the world and practicing the paramitas to transform the world, the bodhisattva path. That we are not talking about going to a nirvana or another. This is the world we have to transform. And this is the dukkha we have to work with and challenge it. So, for us, it was important, even the small thing of putting our garbage room in the front was that the Buddha himself said, we have to face the suffering and then we can transform it. So, why do we want to shun away our garbage? So, these are the things we feel that we want to deal with, and now, earlier I used to think 2 years ago that we are so remote and, nobody will come to Beer, but now we have June 16 and 8 Volvo buses coming here. So in a way, we never felt that Deer Park is a retreat center, that it's we were geographically remote, but it was never like we want to be like that.
This is what I was referring to when I was in the introduction said about spiritual traps we can fall into.
Yes.
The Buddha never taught non-attachment from the fate and suffering of others. He taught non-attachment from your own ego and your own idea of self. And in Mahayana we have this unique concept. This I have not found in Advaita or any other spiritual tradition, including the Christian one or the Islamic one, which is the Bodhisattva ideal. That this is the mind, a person, a being whose mind is aspiring to enlightenment, but who postpones his entry into nirvana till he has helped she has helped every other suffering sentient being, not human being, sentient, animals, creatures, earthworms, everybody, into the path towards enlightenment. So unless everybody is enlightened, unless everybody can enter nirvana, I will postpone my entry into nirvana. This immediately talks about the connection between the self and the world, and therefore you have this whole concept of engaged Buddhism. So it's not just changing your own mind, it's also changing the world.
Is monk going in a community for some community work, or they are just in one space?
No. The monks, a lot of them, I think some of you all visited, I think some of the team members went for this journey earlier, visited this Tonglen project, and I mean, Tibetan history is full of the Dalai Lama is the ruler and he's a monk, and so they are I think Mahayana parampara, which flourished in Tibet, China, more involved in the world. But Theravada, which is where actually this Burma, Thailand, where engaged Buddhism took a reference in the 60s, was that when bombs were falling during Vietnam War and you chose to meditate, then there was a gap. But definitely Mahayana is to engage in the world, definitely.
And Nalanda was the center for Mahayana.
Yes.
So, is there any monks who just stop in between their journey or returning to some normal world? Or
Yeah. So also in Mahayana Buddhism, we don't have so much division between monk and lay person, because the Bodhisattva ideal is the goal. So, Bodhisattvas can take all forms and shapes. So this doesn't limit it to the monk role or the, bhikshu or the pandit. So we need, that's the sort of view.
What is the Bodhisattva?
Like as we said, that your motivation is to help all beings, and that's your goal. And you will attain enlightenment to benefit all, and you will, you sort of take responsibility.
Bodhi means enlightenment.
Sattva is yours, yeah.
Being is on the path to enlightenment, or is already having the mind of enlightenment. Who is working?
So I mean, like somebody like Dalai Lama is seen as a Bodhisattva ideal. That he's not just sitting and doing prayers only. I mean, he's going and trying to work with people, and so these are the kind of references. And so like our teacher we study with and started Deer Park, he's a filmmaker, and he says filmmaking is like Thangka painting. So why do we get stuck? So talking about tradition in time, he says, he's a very high Lama, and when he started making films, a lot of his teachers accused him, you're getting into very bad world, and film, it's all drugs, sex, all this money. And he said, no, but the Buddha uses images to teach. So film is just the medium, right? So it's like another metaphor he uses is that Buddhism is like the tea, and the culture is the cup. So the cup can change time to time, place to place, but the tea should not change. So again, skillful means we have different ways, and Bodhisattvas can be farmers to paragliders to there's no, yeah.
Prashant, how has that definition of activism changed
For me?
For you personally?
Yeah, I think one is black and white is not there, it's all blur now. And that trying to remember that, every being, so like, always every being is a Buddha, and my job is to awaken Buddha, not make them Buddhist or anything, So blur, and also trying to understand interdependence. That this multitude of causes which produce effects, and just trying to open that perspective on causation, and how so that becomes loose again. Otherwise, still we condition for linear. This happened because of this, and he created this, and so some amount of that. Yeah.
When we go on this path, which I've experienced, I'm trying to do this. When we are activists first time, we are all gung-ho, and we are angry at the social injustice, and we are full of hatred for the enemy. And as the Dalai Lama repeatedly says, you have to fight against social injustice or injustice. You also may be angry and use anger as the energy to fight against this system and social injustice. But the anger should arise out of compassion, not hatred. So that's the most important thing. And one of our teachers had given this example to me, that if you have a child who's playing with a gas stove, 3-year-old, lighting matches, trying to burn gas, and the mother tells him 10 times, you are not to do that. At one point, the only thing that will work is if she gives him a solid whack and says, next time you touch it, you'll get even worse from me. I'll just beat you up. Now, when she has to raise her hand to hit the child, she needs some anger, or the hand won't raise if it's all love, touchy-feely. But that hand, the energy that raises that hand is anger, but it comes not because she hates the child, it's because she loves the child and out of compassion. So if we can bring this in activism, very few activists would burn out after a few years. Because burnout comes because of that hatred and the frustration, because you can't really do. You cannot change the other person, you can only change yourself. So that frustration burns you out.